Welcome to Left Right Out. It has been a little while. I have been traveling pretty much across the country because of the holiday season. But what do we got going on? There's a lot of things that have happened over that I just totally didn't even I knew about, uh, these are confirming things I knew about, like Twitter files. I didn't actually talk. I didn't do anything on this because of the holiday season. The Twitter file, it's just what it is doing. This whole Twitter scandal or these files that have come out, which we've all known was happening. We've known this for decades, actually, that there's been certain, whether it be media, legacy media, and then when the tech industry really started coming up, this is part of the intel community's SOPs. When it comes to Operation Mockingbird, when it comes to different operations, some of them that are not disclosed. The infiltration of this because they're useful propaganda tools. And they're easy to manipulate certain opinions. And you've seen in the Twitter files, especially look at we've seen what the FBI done. We knew what the FBI is doing. They're a little more sloppy than the CIA and some of these other agencies. But and same with the Pentagon. The FBI's a lot more sloppy when it comes to their operations than these other entities are. In fact, some of the Twitter files alluded to that. Like CIA doesn't want to be named. They call them something else in a lot of the emails, which at this point you wonder what's not in emails, because a lot of these guys, they understand that you put something in an email, that's solidified. There's a print there, as opposed to whatever burner phones or other forms of communication that can't easily be leaked to the media. So what you see in email is usually just the tip of the iceberg. Nowadays, now that we that the permanent influence of the internet, everybody realizes what emails entail. Now, the Pentagon one was pretty interesting because we've seen them creating bot accounts and influence opinions on wars, and we've known that's happened for a long time. They do that in Hollywood as well. That's been going on for decades. In that, what you wonder how these guys get access to planes and ships and tanks and all this jazz, and there's a little give and take there. From the military, they get a little say in how things run. Same with the CIA when they do. There's certain scripts that go through them, and it gives in the Hollywood whatever producers they want the realistic as possible. So it makes sense. You're like, hey, let's get it from the horse's mouth. So let's talk to somebody that has that experience, or maybe the actual agency. But they want their back scratched too. So and now that what this has done though, and I guess it goes back to what I was just saying. Is it has shown people that there is a political inkling in a lot of the upper class of these, or the upper echelons of these organizations. And they become more like a Praetorian type guard. If you're not familiar with that, the Praetorian Guard was at a late stage of the Roman Empire, was pretty much accused of pretty much picking Caesars at one point, picking leaders. In fact, I believe they were accused of kind of setting some up to their deaths and whatnot. So I always related to something like that, because these guys want to be able to pick leaders and recognize that certain leaders are not going to be good for their business. And there's just, when you're in part of a group, you get this inherent whether it be hooked on power or just you want that group to win. And so these guys, they're operating underneath that kind of mentality, among other things. You have the FBI running kind of cover for the Democratic Party, which it's interesting. I guess I was trying to make this point, but I just went into something else along parallel to that. But this isn't new. What this Twitter files is actually doing is enlightening a lot of conservatives and maybe some independents that, hey, these organizations aren't people that you just willy-nilly support with no matter what. And it's showing them that, and it's lifting the veil that we've all known. And this goes back, and I keep bringing this up, Hoover, William the Wild Bill Donovan from the OSS, and some of those other characters, George H. Bush, E. Howard Hunt. You just look at some weird different characters within organizations. We look at the origins of the OSS and what they actually went through with through World War II and the transition in the CIA. You look at Hoover, who was pretty much running a fourth branch of government, and his honeypot operations, and him being on the take, and a lot of the things that he was doing in the FBI that was nefarious. But it's harder for people to in the American public to understand what was going on in relation to today. One, because it was a little bit harder to, even though you had good, a little bit better journalism back then, but it wasn't permeating society quite as easily as social media, and people were going about their business. I mean, generally life was it was good, as opposed to now we're in like this weird collapse. So people are lashing out and finding things and whatnot. But but it's good to understand that these organizations, whatever their intent when their creation was, are now they are political mechanisms, if not kind of maybe not a party entity like in a communist regime, but they are some sort of political entity, and they have been garnering power over decades, whether it be through national security. That's the go-to word in any judicial sense when you go up against some entity like this, or various other off the books operations that are just kind of let go through the legislative branch, the branch that's supposed to be putting a check on them when it comes to funding. Like, how many times we see this? Like, look at what the FBI has done, and now the veil has been lifted, and conservatives are seeing this. But are they going to cut funding to the FBI? Are they going to crush them like JFK wanted to do the CIA? Are we going to do anything to those or reform them or anything? No. I mean, these guys are still getting bonuses, and they're still getting funding through these omnibus bills and increased funding. Look at, we just found out about the Pentagon thing, and we're seeing all this weirdness going on there. All the crap that's going on through them, and there's no accountability. They get $47 billion extra or whatever, so it doesn't matter. The legislative branch is just a check in the box, and they're a sure check in the box when it comes to their what their political responsibilities are in the society. So they don't even do anything anymore. So essentially, these executive branch and the administrative state, for lack of a better term, I guess, if you want to call them, or these nefarious organizations at this point, they really are. They have no check and balance, and in fact, it's been commonly known, like things like the CIA or whatever, off-book funding that doesn't even go through the legislative branch. I mean, whether that be drug running, whether that be weapons deals. So it's just all a show at this point, and no senator or any group of them, I'll say there's individuals, are willing to stand up and hold them accountable because of the political chaff. If if they were able to get anything funding, the whole earth, according to the media, would be collapsing if we somehow didn't fund the FBI or the CIA or the Pentagon, God forbid, or we slashed Pentagon funding. But what else is going on? Well, the Russia-Ukraine war, which I believe, in my opinion, is now just a weird money laundering scheme. I think that the land advantages are grasped by Russia. Like I said, it was essentially over earlier last year. But if not for Western funding and Western armament, we would have peace deal, and maybe Russia would still get Donetsk and Luhansk and Crimea and that bridge. But at we'd be at more than likely in a peace deal, and Ukraine would get back to rebuilding or whatever. Now we're just at this continuous state of just grinding, almost like a modern day World War I type situation, where there's it's just craziness. And why we haven't gone out for the peace deal in the past, I have no idea. Instead of just constantly sending this money over there, that by the way is being tracked. They're not really tracking it, but they're seeing the weapons systems start showing up in weird places. And this is what happens in one of the most corrupt countries in the world. You send them there, and you can't really track them. Or you can, but we don't. So they wind up getting sold to whatever. They're showing up in Africa. And, granted, some of them are being used against the Russians, HIMARS stuff. There's something popped up. I haven't even read about it. Destroyed some barracks. But think about that. That's just escalating the conflict anymore. Even Henry Kissinger, one of the globalist bastards, has come out with an interesting peace deal. Now, granted, it's going to probably favor some globalist entity. but it is a way to mold Ukraine into Europe and whatnot. But anyway, what was I getting at is the fact that it's interesting politically when you look at this war as well. I was listening to like a Glenn Beck and his guys on there were talking about how I'm going into the weapons thing. Oh, you can't. These things are fired. You can't really track them. Well, I beg to differ. You can track these weapon systems. We track them in the military. You can track whatever by numbers, whether it be bullets. And granted, we screw that up a lot too. But there's guys that sign off. You can track them by numbers. You can track them by serial numbers, especially when it comes even like missile systems or whatever. It doesn't matter. There's serial numbers on there that are tracked, and somebody signs off on that. So you can track these weapons shipments into Ukraine through serialization and understand where those things are going, where they're being deployed, even if they're fired off. I mean, there's ways to do it. In fact, we should have been training them on how to keep track of accountability is a huge thing, especially when you're dealing with advanced weapon systems that could possibly get in the hands of nefarious characters, whether that be a terrorist organization or Russia, which some of them already have. So that happened earlier in the battle when we were sending over there. They had already got a hold of them. What does that do? Well, we're by fighting this proxy war with not our own troops, even though they're on the ground somewhat, but they're not like kinetically fighting Russians. And we're allowing this hodgepodge, because the Ukrainian army is not near as disciplined as a Western army or the Russian army or like a Chinese military, or any like most standing militaries in civilized, but like first world countries. But anyway, so I've seen them firsthand, especially the army, the Ukrainian army. So these weapons are, who knows? They'll drop them on a dime, or they might trade them, or who knows what happens. They leave them. These weapon systems are getting in the hands of other people, especially when you talk about sophisticated ones. Why we're sending sophisticated weapon systems like the HIMARS and the other various weapon systems over there, it doesn't make any sense to me, because if they do get in the hands, you call it reverse engineering. Look what Iran has done with the drone systems that they have, and that I believe, and there's a reason to believe that their drone systems have U.S. technology within them, and that goes back to the reverse engineering. I think they've got two. I know they for sure they got one under the Obama administration where they landed one of our most sophisticated drones in Iran, and you can see them dissecting that thing. So you think about that, what is it, a decade ago or so, and then being able to incorporate that tech into their drone systems, and that's probably why the Russians are actually using them to a certain extent, because it's probably more advanced than their own. And then you look at, which I don't believe this, there's a lot of interesting propaganda coming out of the West. You got to look outside of us. But I was also going to talk about how they're talking about North Korea supplying weapons to Russia, which North Korea, maybe not, but I don't necessarily put a whole lot of credence in that. I'd have to see a little more evidence that besides like a headline in one of the Western. It doesn't even make that much sense. So I use logic, reason, and then some confirming articles and evidences. So that's I guess that's it. I was going down a list of what we should talk about. There's what else is there? There's a lot of things going on. We can talk about the market real quick. The market has been just in this stagnation mode, even though things are deteriorating by the day. And I know I've had the rollout of some option contract. I still have some, what I call their pseudo short positions that I'm still holding on to. I will hold on to those indefinitely until we finally have some kind of reckoning. But it's very interesting the way the market itself is stagnating, but grinding and not reflecting the reality on the ground. And then you look at the bond market, and then the weird inversion of the yield curve, and pretty much the bond market calling out the Fed that they're going to have to cut rates at some time, and that when I look at the Fed funds rate and that inversion compared to like whatever a 10-year or whatever, it's crazy. But it is the market themselves pretty much predicting that the Fed's going to have to come step in and cut rates. Within probably sooner rather than later. If you look at a 2 and a 5, but it's just one of those. We're in this weird quasi thing where there's no real market there. There's no real price discovery. Things are just like kind of just swaying. nobody believes these numbers anyway. And then you also have, that's another thing. There was an article about one of the Feds. Man, I can't remember who it was. They called out the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, about some of their finagling of numbers, which is that's self-evident. I don't necessarily believe that Fed Bank either. They're pretty much, they're nefarious as well. They're the perpetrators of this this system, pretty much government sanctioned monopoly that controls the entire banking system. And we've talked about this before. Fractional reserve banking, the suppression of interest rates, which is fixing price of money, the inflation, which is the creation of money, and I can talk about that for a while. That why things are happening. It's interesting to. That's the last thing we'll end. And in 15 minutes, I gotta keep this under 20. That's what I usually do. But look into that. What Medvedev, who is the former Russian president, who, if you remember that scandal with Obama and him talking on the hot mic, or I wouldn't call it scandal, it's just like, oh wow, this is how things work. Anyway, he made some interesting predictions. Some I can understand, and some are a little out there, but who knows. He's talking about the currency markets, especially going away, de-dollarization, de-eurozation, which is an interesting topic. And he said this year is a big move, which we've seen last year. It's a huge move, which is not reflective of what we're seeing. We haven't felt that pain, but the chessboard is aligning that way, and I can understand where he's coming from. Especially when you look, if you want to look at that, you got to look at Saudi Arabia and the ties that are being sewn or tied together between them and China and Russia and the other BRICS nations, and the snubbing of them and snubbing of us from them. You look at that. That's a key mechanism. Because how did we get through all this? How did we get through all this inflation over the last number of decades? Because I know what even like the Hannitys of the world believe inflation is just a rising price, which inflation is a monetary phenomenon, which causes rising inflation. Like I said, it's a symptom of that. How did we get through it over these number of decades? Well, that's because we're tied to oil, and that's because we've exported these dollars. So some of this foreign aid has actually helped us in the long run. But we've exported our inflation for cheap goods. So, China, whatever it is, they make all these cheap goods they send here. We send them these printed, freshly minted dollars, and it doesn't have to compete for goods that are over here, or properties, whatever, the case, assets. But those times, as the dollar is, as the world de-dollarizes, or as that facade of a reserve currency comes out, those dollars are going to come back too. So that's another wave of inflation, because people want to get something for those dollars as they they lose their viability. So what do? You try to exchange them for wherever you can. So you come over here, and we've kind of seen that a little bit from the Chinese, and when it comes to the real estate market, we're going to start seeing it in a lot of other things as well. They come in and they want to get assets. They want to buy things. They want to trade those dollars. Right now, you can still get oil out of it, so that keeps that kind of over the, out of, I guess, as much of the U.S. It insulates us a little bit, but people are going to want to get rid of that kind of stuff. And then maybe, who knows what's going to happen. Economics is such, you can use the philosophy of economics, which I do, the Austrian perspective, but there's so many little variables, and people, especially policymakers, are always kind of opposing that, trying to control this. So they can do it a little bit for a while, but usually the laws, they try to subvert the laws as much as they possibly can. But you can see the ramifications. They push one way and the bubble goes over here. But anyway, we'll see. I'll talk to you later. Peace.